The first few days were quiet in the best way. I unpacked slowly, worked from my laptop, and started getting used to the sounds the house made at night. I slept better than I had in months. That changed one evening when I came back from the store and noticed both front doors were slightly open. Not wide open, just cracked, like someone had stepped inside and forgotten to close them. I stood there for a second, bags in my hands, listening. The house was silent. My first thought was that I'd made a mistake and left them unlocked. Still, something felt off. The air inside was warmer than it should have been, like the house had been sealed shut for hours. I stepped inside, closed both doors, and locked the one with the deadbolt, telling myself I was overthinking it. I moved into the house because it was cheap and because I needed to be alone for a while. I was 28, working remotely, and tired of hearing other people through thin apartment walls. The place was at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by bare trees and nothing else. The landlord showed it to me once, handed me the keys, and said the previous tenant had left suddenly, like it wasn't important. Inside, the house felt old but normal. Uneven floors, dusty corners, pipes that knocked when the heat came on. The only strange thing was the entryway. There were two front doors next to each other, same size, same color. One had a deadbolt. The other didn't. When I asked why, the landlord shrugged and said it was from an old remodel and told me not to worry about it. The next morning, I checked the hallway in daylight and noticed something I hadn't seen before. The floorboards near the entryway were slightly more worn than the rest, like they'd been stepped on far more often. I brushed it off until I saw faint marks around the knob of the second front door. Small scratches, shallow but deliberate, as if someone had tried to turn it when it was stuck. I ran my finger over them and felt a sharp edge of splintered wood. That was when I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. I bought a cheap security camera that afternoon and set it up facing the doors before going to bed, telling myself it was just for peace of mind. The footage looked normal at first. Hours of nothing. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the image distorted slightly, like the camera struggled to focus. The second door slowly opened inward by a few inches. It didn't swing. It eased open, controlled and quiet. It stayed like that for almost a full minute. Then the hallway darkened in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't a shadow moving across the floor. It was more like the darkness thickened near the door, forming a narrow shape that didn't quite touch the ground. The shape leaned forward but avoided the creaky boards, stopping just short of them. I replayed that clip dozens of times, looking for wires, reflections, anything that could explain it. I found nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with the lights on, listening. Around 4 a.m., I heard a soft click from the front of the house. Not a loud noise, just the sound of a knob being gently tested. Then another click, closer this time, followed by the faint scrape of wood against wood. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Whatever was out there knew the house better than I did. It knew where the floor would betray it, and where it wouldn't. The next day, I asked a neighbor down the road about the house. He paused when I mentioned the two doors. He said the house used to belong to an older couple, and after the husband passed, the wife started claiming someone else was using the second door. She insisted it was for guests, even though no one ever came. After she moved out, the place sat empty for years. When I asked what happened to her, he shook his head and said she moved into assisted living after being found one night standing outside, knocking on her own door, asking to be let back in. That night, the power went out during a storm. The house went silent in a way that felt unnatural. I was sitting in the living room when I heard the second door open again. This time, there was no camera glow, no light to soften it. Just the sound of hinges and the slow pressure of something entering. The creaky board in the hallway didn't make a sound. Whatever it was had learned. I backed into my bedroom and locked the door, my heart pounding so hard it made my ears ring. On the other side, something moved, careful and patient, stopping just inches from the door. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for the handle to turn. It never did. Instead, I heard a faint knocking, not on the door, but on the wall beside it. 3 slow taps. Then silence. When morning came, the front doors were both closed. Locked. The camera footage from the outage was corrupted, nothing but static. I packed a bag that day and told myself I'd stay somewhere else for a while. Still, before leaving, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were faint footprints on the hallway floor, stopping right before the creaky board, like something had learned exactly where not to step. I never went back at night. I broke the lease and moved within the week. The landlord didn't argue. He didn't even ask why. Months passed, and I almost convinced myself it was stress, or sleep deprivation, or my mind filling in gaps. That worked until I saw the house again. I was driving past the area for work and slowed down out of habit. The place looked unchanged, except for one thing. The second front door was gone. In its place was a clean sheet of plywood, freshly nailed, like someone had decided that door should never be used. I contacted the neighbor later and asked if anyone new had moved in. He said no one stayed long. People complained about noises, drafts, doors opening on their own. One tenant claimed someone stood in the hallway at night, waiting for an invitation. When I told him about the camera footage, he went quiet. He said the old woman used to believe the house didn't belong to the living alone. She said every home had space for someone else, and once that space existed, it had to be acknowledged. Ignoring it only made it more persistent. I live somewhere else now, in a newer place with one door and thin walls. I sleep with lights off again. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear a knob turning in another room. Just once. Just enough to remind me. I never installed a second door here, but I've caught myself checking corners of rooms, listening for creaky boards that don't exist. Because whatever learned to wait in that house didn't feel tied to the building itself. It felt like it was tied to the idea of being let in. Story 2. I moved into the apartment because it was temporary. That's what I told myself. I was 31, recently divorced, and staying in the city for a 6-month contract. The building was old but well maintained, the kind with narrow hallways and muted carpet that smelled faintly of cleaning solution. The landlord was efficient and quiet. When he handed me the keys, he mentioned the building had character, which I later learned was a polite way of saying it had quirks. My unit was on the 3rd floor, near the stairwell. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, small kitchen. Simple. I wasn't looking for comfort, just a place to sleep and work until my contract ended. The first week passed without incident. I fell into a routine quickly. Work during the day, quiet evenings, early nights. The building was surprisingly silent after dark, which I appreciated. Then, one night, I woke up around 2:40 a.m. to the sound of movement in the hallway outside my door. Not voices. Not footsteps exactly. It sounded like furniture being dragged slowly across carpet. I sat up and listened. The sound stopped abruptly, like whoever was making it realized they'd been heard. I waited for something else to happen, but the hallway went quiet again. I told myself someone was rearranging their apartment and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I noticed something strange when I left for work. There was a door across the hall from mine that I hadn't paid attention to before. It was unmarked, painted the same color as the wall, with no apartment number. I assumed it was a maintenance closet. When I came back that evening, the door was gone. Not closed. Gone. The wall was smooth where it had been, like it had never existed. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to remember if I was mixing it up with another floor. Eventually, I convinced myself I was mistaken and unlocked my door, feeling oddly unsettled by how easily I doubted my own memory. A few nights later, the noise came back. Louder this time. It started around the same hour, a low dragging sound that traveled up and down the hallway. I opened my door a crack and looked out. The hallway lights flickered, casting long shadows along the carpet. Halfway down the hall, I saw the door again. The unmarked one. It stood slightly ajar now, revealing nothing but darkness inside. The sound was coming from there. I stared at it for several seconds, waiting for someone to step out. No one did. Slowly, carefully, the door closed on its own. When it clicked shut, the hallway light steadied, and the sound stopped. I emailed the landlord the next day, asking about a door across from my unit. His reply was brief. He said there had never been a door there and suggested I might be confusing it with the utility room near the stairs. I checked. The utility room was locked and clearly labeled. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way the door had moved. The next morning, there was a notice taped near the elevator announcing renovations on the 3rd floor. No dates. No details. Just a warning about temporary disturbances. The dragging sounds returned that night, slower, heavier, like something large being repositioned. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. The carpet felt colder than usual under my bare feet. The unmarked door was back, fully visible now, as if it had always been part of the building. I approached it slowly. There was no handle on the outside, just a flat metal plate where one should have been. As I stood there, the dragging sound stopped, replaced by a faint rhythmic tapping from inside. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. I stepped back, heart racing, and that's when I realized the tapping matched the sound of knuckles against wood, right where a handle should have been. I retreated into my apartment and locked the door. A few minutes later, I heard something that made my stomach drop. A soft knock, coming from the inside of my unit. Not at the front door. From the wall behind my couch. I froze, staring at the blank wall as the knocking continued, slow and deliberate. It felt like someone was testing boundaries, figuring out where they were allowed to be heard. When the knocking stopped, the hallway outside erupted with noise again, dragging and scraping moving past my door, lingering, then fading away toward the stairwell. I measured the living room the next morning. It was shorter than it had been before. Not by much. A few inches at most. The wall behind the couch felt colder to the touch. That night, I heard the door open again. This time, the dragging sound came from inside my own apartment, moving behind the wall. Something heavy was being repositioned, slowly, patiently. I sat on my bed, holding my phone, listening as the sound stopped directly behind the wall. Then came a gentle knock, right at ear level. 1 tap. Then another. Waiting. I didn't stay after that. I packed what I could fit into my car and left before dawn. I reported everything to the landlord, who responded by reminding me of the lease termination fee. I paid it without arguing. A month later, out of morbid curiosity, I checked the building's online listings. My unit was listed again. The floor plan had changed. The living room was smaller. And across the hall, directly opposite my old door, was a room labeled simply as storage. No photos. No description. I contacted the tenant who moved in after me through a local forum. He lasted 2 weeks. He told me he kept hearing someone knocking from inside the walls, asking to be let out. He said the building felt crowded at night, like it was holding more people than it should. When he tried to complain, management claimed ignorance. He moved out after waking up to find a new door in his bedroom that hadn't been there before, slightly open, breathing warm air into the room. I live in a newer place now, with clear floor plans and thin walls. Still, sometimes when I wake up at night, I hear faint knocking, coming from places that shouldn't be hollow. I don't answer. I don't investigate. Because whatever was rearranging that building didn't feel malicious. It felt methodical. Like it was making room. And I still get the sense that if I had stayed just a little longer, I wouldn't have needed to leave at all. Story 3. I rented the house because it was close to my job and because it felt temporary. I was 34, newly transferred, and didn't want to get attached to anything. The house was part of an older neighborhood, the kind where every place looks similar but somehow feels different once you step inside. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a narrow hallway that connected everything. The landlord walked me through quickly and joked that the place had good bones. I noticed right away that the main bedroom window didn't face the street or the backyard. It faced another wall of the house. I assumed it was an odd extension or renovation and didn't think much of it. The first nights were quiet, almost too quiet. No traffic noise, no neighbors I could hear through the walls. I slept deeply, but I kept waking up with a strange feeling that I wasn't fully alone. Not watched exactly. Just accompanied. One night, around 3 a.m., I opened my eyes and noticed the room felt different. The air was warmer, heavier. I lay still, listening, until I heard a faint sound coming from the wall the window faced. A soft shuffling, like fabric brushing against wood. It stopped as soon as I focused on it. I told myself it was pipes or insulation shifting and rolled over, forcing myself back to sleep. In the morning, I stood outside to look at the house from the yard. That's when I realized something that made my stomach tighten. From the outside, there was no window where my bedroom window should have been. The wall was solid, uninterrupted siding. I walked the perimeter twice, convinced I'd missed it. I hadn't. The window only existed from inside. I laughed it off in the moment, assuming it was some trick of perspective or a covered exterior pane. Still, that night, I closed the curtains before bed, even though they blocked a view that didn't technically exist. A few days later, I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not my own. Slow and steady, coming from directly in front of me. I lay frozen, staring at the dark shape of the curtains. The breathing stopped when I held my own breath. The silence stretched on long enough for me to think I'd imagined it. Then the curtains shifted slightly, as if something behind them had leaned closer. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The curtains hung still. The window was there, just like always. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I started keeping the bedroom door locked. During the day, everything felt normal. At night, the room felt different, like it was facing somewhere else entirely. One evening, I noticed faint handprints on the inside of the glass. They were small, smudged, and gone by morning. I cleaned the window myself, scrubbing until my arm ached. That night, I heard tapping. Not on the glass. On the wall beside it. 3 taps, evenly spaced. I waited. After a pause, 3 more taps answered from inside the wall, deeper, slower, like a reply. I asked the landlord about the window the next day. He frowned and said the room used to be a nursery before an addition was built years ago. When I asked what the window faced back then, he hesitated before saying it faced another house that no longer stood. He changed the subject quickly. That night, the window reflected something it shouldn't have. Instead of my room, I saw a narrow hallway behind the glass, dimly lit, stretching far past where my wall should end. A door stood at the end of it, slightly open. I stood there, staring at the reflection, afraid to move. The hallway didn't change when I shifted. It stayed perfectly still, like it was waiting. Slowly, a shadow crossed the floor in the reflection, moving toward the door. The door opened wider, revealing darkness beyond it. I stepped back, my heel hitting the bed frame, and the reflection vanished instantly. The glass showed only my room again. That night, I dreamed I was standing in that hallway, knocking softly on a door, hoping someone on the other side would hear me. When I woke up, my knuckles hurt. Red marks bloomed across my skin like I'd been knocking for a long time. I started sleeping on the couch after that. Even there, I could feel the bedroom pulling at me, like a pressure behind my eyes. One night, I heard footsteps pacing inside the bedroom, slow and restless. The door handle rattled once, gently, like someone testing if it was locked. I didn't respond. The footsteps stopped right behind the door and stayed there until morning. When I woke up, my knuckles hurt. Red marks bloomed across my skin like I'd been knocking for a long time. I started sleeping on the couch after that. Even there, I could feel the bedroom pulling at me, like a pressure behind my eyes. One night, I heard footsteps pacing inside the bedroom, slow and restless. The door handle rattled once, gently, like someone testing if it was locked. I didn't respond. The footsteps stopped right behind the door and stayed there until morning. I left the house a week later. The landlord didn't protest. He asked only one thing before I handed back the keys. He told me to make sure the bedroom window was covered. I didn't ask why. Months later, I drove past the house out of curiosity. The bedroom window was gone, replaced with solid siding. But the shape of it was still visible, like a scar that hadn't healed properly. I looked up the address afterward and found an old article about a neighboring house that burned down decades ago. The fire started in a bedroom. The occupants were never found. The article mentioned witnesses who claimed they saw someone standing at a window that shouldn't have existed, knocking calmly from the inside while the fire spread behind them. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. New stories are coming, and they won't always wait to be found. The truth is, we like to believe we're alone when the lights go out. That the noises have explanations. That empty rooms are really empty. But some places remember us. Some doors don't lead where they should. And some things only need to be noticed, to follow you home. Thank you for watching the video. This was The Last Screaming.